The deafening blast of the explosion shook the earth as the Pacific and Eastern locomotive careened off the tracks, smoke billowing into the clear New Mexico sky. Josephine Jensen clutched desperately at the plush velvet seat as the passenger car lurched violently sideways, her knuckles white and her heart hammering against her ribcage. The terrifying sound of twisting metal and shattering glass filled the air as the train tumbled down the embankment, coming to rest with a bone-jarring impact that sent her tumbling into darkness. When Josephine opened her eyes, the world was sideways. The elegant passenger car lay on its side, sunlight streaming through broken windows, dust particles dancing in the golden beams. She tasted blood on her lip and felt a sharp pain in her left ankle. Around her, moans and cries rose from the other passengers, some still trapped in their seats, others crawling toward shattered windows now facing the sky. "Everyone stay calm," a woman's voice called out. "We need to help each other." Josephine tried to stand but winced as pain shot through her ankle. Using the seats as handholds, she pulled herself up, her once immaculate blue traveling dress now torn and smudged with soot. The train had been bound for Santa Fe, where she was to take up a position as a schoolteacher. Now she found herself in what she knew must be outlaw territory, miles from Cimarron or any other civilized settlement. A gunshot cracked outside the train, followed by another. Then came rough voices, laughing and shouting orders. "Check for survivors. Grab anything valuable. Ladies first, boys." Terror seized Josephine's heart. Train robberies were common enough, but this had been no ordinary robbery. The train had been deliberately derailed. And now the outlaws were coming to finish their grim work. A man in a dusty bowler had appeared at one of the broken windows above, silhouetted against the bright sky. Well, what have we here?" he drawled, his eyes scanning the frightened passengers. "Looks like we got ourselves some fine pickings today." Josephine shrank back against the wall of the car as more men appeared at the windows, some already dropping inside to begin ransacking luggage and rifling through the passengers' pockets. A gray-haired man tried to resist and was rewarded with a pistol butt to his temple. He collapsed with a groan as his wife screamed. Outside, more gunfire erupted, but it sounded different now, a measured, deliberate response rather than the wild shooting of the outlaws. The man in the bowler hat spun around, drawing his pistol. "Sanderson's men," he shouted. "It's an ambush." The outlaws inside the car began scrambling back toward the windows, firing wildly as they retreated. Bullets splintered wood around Josephine, and she dropped to the floor, covering her head with her arms. The gunfight intensified, then gradually died down. Josephine remained huddled against the wall, too terrified to move. When footsteps approached the car again, she tensed, preparing for the worst. A tall figure appeared at one of the windows, backlit by the sun so that Josephine could only see his silhouette, broad-shouldered with a wide-brimmed hat. He dropped lightly into the car, landing in a crouch with a revolver held ready in one hand. "Is anyone hurt badly?" he called, his voice deep and steady. As he moved into the shadowed interior of the car, Josephine could finally see him clearly. He wore a faded denim shirt under a leather vest, jeans worn smooth at the knees, and dusty boots with worn spurs. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear blue and alert, scanning the car with practiced efficiency. "My name's Kieran Evans," he said, holstering his weapon. "I work for the Railroad Security Division. Those men were part of the Blackwater gang. They've been hitting trains all through the territory." He moved among the passengers, checking for injuries. "We need to get you folks to safety. There might be more of them out there." When he reached Josephine, he knelt beside her. "Can you walk, miss?" I think I've hurt my ankle," she replied, her voice shakier than she would have liked. He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "What's your name?" "Josephine Jensen. I was traveling to Santa Fe." "Well, Miss Jensen, I'm afraid Santa Fe will have to wait." He glanced toward the broken windows. "We need to move quickly. The rest of the gang could return with reinforcements." Before she could respond, gunfire erupted again outside. Kieran's hand went immediately to his revolver. "They're back sooner than I expected," he muttered. Looking at the other passengers, he raised his voice. "Everyone who can walk, head for the trees to the north. My partner Pete is waiting there with horses." As the able-bodied passengers began scrambling toward the windows, Kieran turned back to Josephine. "I'm afraid we don't have time for gentle manners, Miss Jensen." Without further warning, he scooped her up in his arms. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. "Hold tight," he said, moving toward an opening in the side of the car where the metal had torn away. Outside was chaos. Bodies of outlaws lay scattered across the ground. The locomotive lay on its side, still hissing steam. Several of the train cars had completely overturned. Kieran carried Josephine across the debris-strewn ground, moving with surprising speed despite his burden. Bullets kicked up dirt around them as the remaining outlaws fired from the cover of boulders several hundred yards away. "Pete," Kieran shouted as they reached the tree line. "We need covering fire." A man with a Winchester rifle stepped out from behind a pine tree and began firing methodically toward the outlaw's position. Kieran continued carrying Josephine deeper into the forest, finally setting her down gently behind a fallen log. "Wait here," he said, his blue eyes meeting hers for a moment. "I need to help the others." Before she could thank him, he was gone, racing back toward the wreckage. Josephine watched as he and the man called Pete helped more passengers reach the safety of the trees. The outlaws' gunfire became more sporadic, then stopped altogether. Either they had given up or were regrouping for another attack. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the pines, Kieran returned to where Josephine sat. He knelt beside her, his expression grave. "The outlaws have pulled back for now, but they'll be back by morning with more men. We need to move everyone to Cimarron. It's about 15 miles northeast of here." 15 miles. Josephine glanced down at her swollen ankle. "I'm not sure I can. You won't have to walk," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "I've got a horse for you." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she hopped on her good foot. When they reached the small clearing where the other passengers had gathered, Josephine was surprised to see a string of horses tethered to a tree. "We confiscated these from the outlaws we dealt with," Pete explained, noticing her questioning look. "Seemed only fair given the circumstances." Kieran led Josephine to a chestnut mare with a white blaze down its face. "This is Penny," he said. "She's gentle and sure-footed. She'll get you to Cimarron safely." He helped Josephine mount, his strong hands encircling her waist as he lifted her onto the saddle. For a moment, their eyes met again, and something passed between them, a spark of connection that momentarily made Josephine forget the pain in her ankle and the terror of the train derailment. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, his expression unreadable, then turned to help an elderly woman onto another horse. As the moon rose over the New Mexico wilderness, the group set out, moving at a cautious pace through the pine forest. Kieran rode at the head of the column, occasionally dropping back to check on the passengers. Each time he passed Josephine, he offered a reassuring nod or a few quiet words. "How's the ankle holding up? Are you warm enough? Not much farther now." His concern seemed genuine, not merely professional duty. Josephine found herself watching for his approach, her heart beating a little faster each time he drew near. Around midnight, they stopped by a small stream to rest the horses. Kieran helped Josephine dismount and guided her to a fallen log where she could sit. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her injured ankle. When she nodded, he gently removed her boot and examined the swelling. His touch was surprisingly delicate for hands so clearly accustomed to hard work and gunplay. "It's not broken," he said after a careful examination. "Just a bad sprain. Still, you should stay off it as much as possible." He tore a strip from his own bandana and dipped it in the cool stream water, then wrapped it carefully around her ankle. "This should help with the swelling." "You seem to know a lot about injuries," Josephine observed. A shadow passed over his face. "The war taught me more than I ever wanted to know about wounds and how to treat them." "You fought in the war." She hadn't considered his age. He seemed timeless somehow, though looking at him now, she guessed he was in his early 30s. "Union cavalry," he said simply, clearly uncomfortable with the subject. "It was a long time ago." "My brother died at Gettysburg," Josephine said quietly. "He was 19. Kieran's eyes met hers, and in them she saw understanding and a shared pain. "I'm sorry," he said. The simple words carried genuine empathy. For a moment, they sat in silence, connected by the shared experience of loss that had touched so many American lives. "What brought you west?" he asked finally, changing the subject. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher in Santa Fe," she replied. "Or at least I was supposed to be. Now I'm not sure if I'll make it in time for the start of term." "You're a teacher," he seemed surprised. "Is that so hard to believe?" She asked, feeling slightly defensive. "No, it's just—" He glanced away, then back to her face. "You don't seem like you're from out here. Your accent, your manner of speaking. You're from back east, aren't you?" "Boston," she confirmed. "But there are plenty of opportunities for educators out here. New settlements need schools, and schools need teachers." He nodded thoughtfully. "It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind and come out to this wilderness." "Or desperation," she said with a small smile. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Teaching opportunities for unmarried women are limited in Boston," she explained, "and becoming more so. When the position in Santa Fe was offered, I couldn't afford to refuse it." Before Kieran could respond, Pete approached them. "Riders coming from the south," he said quietly, moving fast. Kieran was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his revolver. "Get everyone mounted," he ordered. "We need to move." The peaceful moment shattered. Kieran helped Josephine back onto Penny's saddle, his movements efficient but still gentle. "Stay close to me," he instructed. "If there's trouble, ride hard for Cimarron. Don't stop for anything." Within minutes, the entire group was moving again, this time at a faster pace that made Josephine wince as her injured ankle bumped against the saddle. Kieran led them deeper into the forest, away from the trail they had been following. "Won't this make the journey longer?" Josephine asked when he rode alongside her. "Yes, but it might save our lives," he replied grimly. "The Blackwater gang doesn't give up easily, especially not when a train robbery goes wrong." They rode through the night, the dense forest gradually giving way to more open country as they approached the foothills. Twice more they heard riders in the distance, but each time Kieran's knowledge of the terrain allowed them to evade detection. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Josephine caught her first glimpse of Cimarron in the valley below a small but thriving settlement with wooden buildings lining a main street, smoke already rising from morning fires. "We made it," she breathed, relief washing over her. Kieran nodded, though his eyes remained watchful. "Not quite home free yet. Let's get down there before our friends catch up to us." The descent into the valley was nerve-wracking. The trail was steep and exposed, making them visible to anyone scanning the hills. Josephine's hands were white-knuckled on the reins as Penny picked her way carefully down the slope. They were halfway to the town when Pete, riding rearguard, galloped up to Kieran. "They've spotted us," he reported tersely. "6 riders coming fast." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Get the passengers to town," he ordered. "I'll hold them off." "Kieran, there are too many, just do it, Pete. Get these people to safety." Pete hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He began urging the passengers to pick up the pace, leading them down the trail at a dangerous speed. Kieran turned to Josephine. "Go with them," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "But you can't face them alone," she protested. For a moment, his stern expression softened. "I'll be right behind you," he promised. "Now go." Before she could object further, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back up the trail, drawing his rifle from its scabbard as he rode. With a last concerned glance over her shoulder, Josephine urged Penny to follow the others down the trail. The gunfire began a few minutes later, isolated shots at first, then a sustained exchange that echoed off the canyon walls. They reached the outskirts of Cimarron just as the town was fully waking. Pete led them straight to the sheriff's office, where a grizzled man with a star pinned to his vest listened to their story with growing concern. "The Blackwater gang," Sheriff Miller said, shaking his head. "They've been getting bolder. I'll gather a posse," and he was interrupted by more gunfire from the hills above town. Everyone turned to look as a lone rider came galloping down the trail, pursued by several men firing wildly from horseback. "It's Kieran," Josephine gasped, recognizing the rider even at that distance. The sheriff and his deputy grabbed rifles and ran into the street, joined by several townsfolk who had been awakened by the commotion. They opened fire on the pursuing outlaws, forcing them to veer away as Kieran reached the safety of the town. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, his left arm hanging awkwardly at his side. Blood stained his shirt sleeve. "You're hurt," Josephine said, moving toward him as quickly as her injured ankle would allow. "Just a graze," he replied dismissively, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "Did everyone make it?" "Thanks to you," Pete confirmed. "But it looks like you caught more than a graze, partner." Kieran swayed slightly, and Josephine reached him just in time to support him as his knees buckled. "I might need to sit down for a minute," he admitted, his voice strained. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The sheriff organized a posse to pursue the outlaws, while the town doctor tended to Kieran and the other injured passengers. Josephine refused to leave Kieran's side as the doctor extracted a bullet from his upper arm and stitched the wound closed. "You're lucky," the doctor told him. "An inch to the right and it would have shattered your shoulder bone." "Feels lucky," Kieran muttered through gritted teeth. "He needs rest," the doctor informed Josephine. "And so do you by the look of that ankle, Mrs. Powell runs a boarding house on Pine Street. She'll have rooms for both of you." Josephine helped Kieran to his feet, supporting him as they made their slow way to the boarding house. Mrs. Powell, a kindly widow in her 60s, clucked sympathetically over their injuries and showed them to adjacent rooms on the ground floor. "I'll have hot water and food sent up directly," she assured them. "You poor dears have been through quite an ordeal." When they were alone in the hallway, Kieran turned to Josephine, his blue eyes serious beneath his pain-furrowed brow. "Thank you for your help, Miss Jensen. You've been remarkably composed through all this." "I think I used up all my panic when the train first derailed," she admitted with a small smile. "And please call me Josephine." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Josephine," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "I'm glad you made it safely to Cimarron." "Thanks to you," she reminded him. You saved my life all our lives." He shrugged his good shoulder. "Just doing my job." "Is it your job to face 6 armed outlaws alone?" A flicker of something humor, perhaps, or embarrassment crossed his face. That may have been above and beyond the job description. They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite ready to part ways. Finally, Kieran winced as he shifted his weight, reminding them both of his injury. "You should rest," Josephine said gently. "The doctor was very clear about that." "So should you," he countered, glancing at her ankle. They parted reluctantly, each to their own room. Josephine sank gratefully onto the bed, her ankle throbbing painfully now that the immediate danger had passed. Outside, she could hear the town coming fully to life, wagons rattling down the main street, shopkeepers calling greetings to one another, children laughing as they ran to school. It all seemed so normal, so peaceful, as if the terror of the train derailment and the flight through the night had happened to someone else. Yet the vivid memory of Kieran carrying her from the wreckage, of his steady presence through the long night, remained crystal clear. She had never met a man like him, capable and commanding in a crisis, yet gentle when gentleness was needed. The men she had known in Boston had been cut from different cloth, entirely refined, educated, concerned with social standing and proper behavior. None of them, she suspected, would have faced down armed outlaws to protect strangers. As she drifted off to sleep, exhaustion finally claiming her, her last conscious thought was of Kieran's blue eyes and the way they had looked at her with such concern and kindness. When Josephine awoke, late afternoon sunlight was streaming through the window. Someone had placed a tray of food on the bedside table, a bowl of stew, now cold, and a piece of corn bread. Her ankle had been rebandaged while she slept, and a walking stick leaned against the wall near the door. She was hungry, but her first thought was of Kieran. Was he resting comfortably? Had his wound begun to heal? Using the walking stick, she made her way cautiously to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. She hobbled to Kieran's door and knocked softly. There was no answer. Concerned, she knocked a little louder. Still nothing. Mrs. Powell appeared from the direction of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, you're up, dear. How's the ankle feeling?" "Better, thank you. Is Mr. Evans in his room? I wanted to check on him." "Oh, he left hours ago, Mrs. Powell said, shaking her head disapprovingly. "The sheriff came by with news about those outlaws, and off he went, arm in a sling and all. I told him he ought to rest at least a day, but he's a stubborn one." Disappointment washed over Josephine, followed quickly by worry. "He went after the outlaws, with his arm injured. That's what the sheriff said, something about needing his tracking skills." Mrs. Powell sighed. "Men, always rushing into danger when they ought to be taking care of themselves." Josephine couldn't disagree. She remembered the determined set of Kieran's jaw when he'd ridden back to face the outlaws alone. Of course he would go after them again, injured or not. "You know when they might return. Hard to say. Depends on how far they have to track those scoundrels." Mrs. Powell patted Josephine's arm comfortingly. "Don't you worry, dear. Our Sheriff Miller is quite capable, and your Mr. Evans strikes me as a man who can take care of himself." "He's not my Mr. Evans," Josephine corrected automatically, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Powell smiled knowingly. "Of course not, dear. Now come have some hot food. You need to keep up your strength if that ankle is going to heal properly." Over a fresh bowl of stew in Mrs. Powell's cozy kitchen, Josephine learned more about Cimarron and its surroundings. The town had grown rapidly over the past 5 years, fueled by the cattle trade and nearby mining operations. It was a rough place at times, with cowboys and miners looking for entertainment after long weeks of hard work, but it had its share of respectable businesses and families as well. "We even have a small school," Mrs. Powell told her. "Though our teacher, Miss Whitmore, is getting married next month and moving to Denver with her new husband, the town council is in quite a state trying to find a replacement before the fall term." Josephine's ears perked up at this information. "I'm actually a teacher," she said. "I was on my way to take a position in Santa Fe when the train was derailed." Mrs. Powell's eyes lit up. "Is that so? My goodness, what a fortunate coincidence. You must speak with Mayor Thompson right away. He's heading the search committee for a new teacher." "But I've already accepted the Santa Fe position," Josephine pointed out. "I signed a contract." "Well, dear, that train isn't going anywhere soon from what I hear. The tracks were badly damaged in the derailment. It could be weeks before the line is repaired." Mrs. Powell leaned forward conspiratorially. "And between you and me, Cimarron is a much more pleasant place to live than Santa Fe. Less crowded, more neighborly." The idea was tempting. Josephine had chosen the Santa Fe position primarily because it was the first offer she'd received, not because she had any particular attachment to the city. And now, with her ankle injured and the railroad line damaged, reaching Santa Fe before the start of the school term seemed increasingly unlikely. "I'll think about it," she promised Mrs. Powell. "But first, I should send a telegram to the school board in Santa Fe, explaining the situation." After finishing her meal, Josephine made her way slowly to the telegraph office near the center of town. The operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, took down her message to the Santa Fe school board, explaining the train derailment and her injury. "Not sure when this will get through," he warned her. "The telegraph line to Santa Fe has been having problems the past few days, probably those same outlaws who hit your train." "Is there any news about the posse? Have they found the gang?" The operator shook his head. "Nothing yet. But Sheriff Miller knows what he's doing. And that railroad man who went with them, Evans, I think his name was, he's got quite a reputation as a tracker." "You know Mr. Evans?" "Know of him," the operator clarified. "He works special security for the railroad, hunting down gangs that target the trains. They say he's brought in more outlaws than any lawman in the territory." This new information about Kieran intrigued Josephine. He had seemed so modest about his role, describing himself simply as working for railroad security. If the telegraph operator was to be believed, Kieran was more than just a security guard, he was a renowned manhunter. As she left the telegraph office, Josephine noticed a small crowd gathering in front of the saloon across the street. Curious, she made her way over, leaning heavily on her walking stick. "What's happening?" she asked a woman standing at the edge of the crowd. "Riders coming in from the north," the woman replied. "Might be the posse returning." Josephine's heart leaped. Perhaps Kieran was back already. She stood on tiptoe, trying to see over the heads of the crowd, wincing as she accidentally put weight on her injured ankle. A group of riders appeared at the far end of the main street, moving at a walking pace. As they drew closer, Josephine could make out Sheriff Miller in the lead, followed by several dusty, tired-looking men. Behind them came two more horses pulling a wagon with what appeared to be bodies covered by canvas. Her breath caught in her throat. Had members of the posse been killed? Was Kieran among them? She scanned the riders desperately, searching for his familiar broad-shouldered figure. Relief flooded through her when she spotted him near the back of the group, his left arm still in a sling but otherwise appearing unharmed. The sheriff reined in front of the gathered crowd. "We got 4 of them," he announced, "including Joe Blackwater himself." He gestured to the wagon. "The rest scattered, but they won't be troubling this territory again anytime soon." A cheer went up from the crowd. As the posse dismounted, slapping dust from their clothes and accepting congratulatory handshakes from the townsfolk, Josephine made her way toward Kieran. He had just handed his horse's reins to a stable boy when he spotted her approaching. "Miss Jensen," he said, his tired face brightening, "should you be walking around?" "Mrs. Powell provided me with this," she replied, indicating the walking stick, "and I wanted to see if you were all right." "Mrs. Powell said you left hours ago right after having a bullet removed from your arm." He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "The trail was fresh. We had to move quickly." "And was it worth risking your recovery?" she asked, unable to keep a note of scolding from her voice. A slow smile spread across his face. "We got Joe Blackwater. He's been terrorizing the railroads for over a year, so yes, I'd say it was worth it." Despite her concern, Josephine found herself smiling back. His obvious satisfaction was infectious. "Then I'm glad you went, though I still think you should have rested longer." "I'll rest now," he promised, "after a bath and a meal." He glanced down at his dusty, blood-stained clothes. "I'm not fit company for a lady at the moment." "I've seen you in worse condition," she reminded him. "When you were carrying me from the train wreck." Something flickered in his eyes at the memory. "You were remarkably brave that day," he said softly. "Most women would have been hysterical after such an ordeal." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But there didn't seem to be much point in screaming about it." He laughed then, a warm, genuine sound that transformed his weather-beaten face. "Josephine Jensen, you are unlike any woman I've ever met." The way he said her name sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Evans?" "Kieran," he corrected. "And yes, it most definitely is." Their conversation was interrupted by Pete, who approached with a telegram in his hand. "Wire just came in from the railroad office in Santa Fe," he told Kieran. "They want us back there as soon as possible. New assignment." Kieran's expression grew serious again. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. There's a stage leaving at dawn." Josephine felt a pang of disappointment. She had hoped to have more time to get to know Kieran now that the immediate danger was past. The thought of him leaving so soon left her feeling strangely bereft. Kieran seemed to share her sentiment. "So soon?" he asked Pete, frowning. "That's what the wire says." Pete glanced between Kieran and Josephine, a knowing look in his eyes. "I'll let you two finish your conversation. See you at dinner, partner." He tipped his hat to Josephine and walked away. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Kieran spoke. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect to be called away so quickly." "You have your duties," Josephine said, trying to sound understanding rather than disappointed. "As do I. I need to get to Santa Fe as soon as possible." "About that," he said, his expression thoughtful. "The railroad will be sending work crews to repair the tracks where the derailment happened, but it could take weeks. The stage is the fastest way to Santa Fe now." "Then perhaps I should inquire about passage on tomorrow's stage as well," she suggested, though the thought of spending hours in a jolting stagecoach with her injured ankle was not appealing. Kieran's brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure that's wise, with your ankle still healing?" "I have responsibilities in Santa Fe," she reminded him, though even as she spoke, she thought of Mrs. Powell's suggestion about the teaching position in Cimarron. He nodded, respecting her determination. "At least let me help you make arrangements. And—" He hesitated, then continued, "Perhaps we could share dinner this evening, before we both leave tomorrow." The invitation sent a flutter through her chest. "I would like that very much." His smile returned, warming his blue eyes. "Good. I'll call for you at the boarding house at 7, if that's agreeable." "Perfectly agreeable," she replied, smiling back. As she watched him walk away toward the hotel where he was presumably staying, Josephine felt a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. Joy at the prospect of dining with him, sadness at the thought of their imminent parting, and underneath it all, a growing certainty that Kieran Evans was becoming important to her in a way no man ever had before. That evening, Josephine took extra care with her appearance. Mrs. Powell had kindly provided a dress to replace her torn traveling outfit, a simple blue gown that fit well enough after minor adjustments. She arranged her dark hair in a modest but becoming style and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. "My, don't you look lovely, Mrs. Powell said when Josephine emerged from her room. "That Mr. Evans is in for a pleasant surprise. We're just having dinner before we both leave tomorrow," Josephine explained, trying not to betray how much the evening meant to her. "Of course, dear Mrs. Powell replied with that same knowing smile. "Just dinner." Kieran arrived precisely at 7, looking transformed from the dusty, trail-worn man she had seen earlier. He had bathed and shaved, his dark hair still damp and neatly combed. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark waistcoat, and his trousers had been pressed. Only the sling on his left arm remained as evidence of their recent ordeal. His eyes widened appreciatively when he saw her. "Miss Jensen, Josephine, you look beautiful." She felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you. You clean up quite nicely yourself, Kieran." He offered his good arm with a small bow. "Shall we?" He escorted her to a small restaurant near the town square, the finest establishment Cimarron had to offer, according to Mrs. Powell. It was modest by Boston standards, but the tables were covered with clean cloths, and lamps cast a warm, inviting glow over the room. The proprietor, a round-faced Italian immigrant named Angelo, greeted them enthusiastically. "Mr. Evans, we are honored. And who is this lovely lady?" "Miss Josephine Jensen," Kieran introduced her. "She was on the train that was derailed by the Blackwater gang." Angelo's expression grew sympathetic. "Ah, such a terrible thing. But you are safe now, Signorina, and in good hands with Mr. Evans. He is a hero, no?" "Yes, he certainly is," Josephine agreed, smiling at Kieran's obvious embarrassment. Angelo led them to a corner table, somewhat secluded from the other diners. "Our best table," he assured them with a wink that made Josephine blush again. Over a simple but delicious meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, they talked about everything and nothing. Kieran told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, joining the Union Army at 18, and eventually finding his way to the Railroad Security Division after drifting through various jobs after the war. "I was good with horses and guns," he explained. "Not much else." The railroad needed men who could track outlaws and protect their interests. It seemed like a good fit. "And is it?" she asked. "A good fit," he considered the question seriously. "Most days, it's honest work and I'm good at it, but—" He trailed off, looking down at his plate. "But—" she prompted gently. "But it's a lonely life," he admitted. "Always on the move, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. She sensed he wasn't a man who often shared such personal thoughts. "I understand loneliness," she said softly. "After my brother died in the war and my parents followed a few years later, I found myself very much alone in a city full of people. Teaching gave me purpose, but not belonging," he finished for her. "Exactly." Their eyes met across the table, and in that moment, Josephine felt a connection deeper than any she had experienced before. Here was someone who understood her in a fundamental way, despite their different backgrounds and experiences. "I inquired about the stagecoach," Kieran said after a moment, changing the subject. "There are 2 seats available for tomorrow's run to Santa Fe." "That's fortunate," she replied, though her enthusiasm for reaching Santa Fe had dimmed considerably since their conversation began. "I also spoke with Mayor Thompson," he continued, watching her reaction carefully. He mentioned that you're a teacher and that Cimarron is in need of one. Surprised, she set down her fork. You spoke to the mayor about me. I hope you don't mind. When I heard about the teaching position here, I thought. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought perhaps it might be an option worth considering. The salary is comparable to what Santa Fe offered and the town is growing. The children need a good education. Mrs. Powell mentioned the position to me as well, Josephine admitted, but I signed a contract with the Santa Fe School Board. Contracts can be renegotiated, especially in circumstances like these. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not trying to influence your decision. I just wanted you to know all your options. But he was influencing her decision, whether he intended to or not. The thought of remaining in Cimarron was becoming increasingly appealing, and not just because of the teaching position. What about you? She asked. You're leaving for Santa Fe tomorrow. A shadow crossed his face. Yes, duty calls. And after Santa Fe, where will the railroad send you next? I don't know, he admitted. Wherever there's trouble, I suppose, she nodded, a heaviness settling in her chest. Even if she stayed in Cimarron, Kieran would be gone, possibly never to return. Their paths had crossed by chance, a violent, terrifying chance, but they would soon diverge again. Josephine, he said her name softly, reaching across the table to touch her hand. I've never met anyone like you. These past 2 days, despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, have meant more to me than I can express. Her heart quickened at his words and the warmth of his hand on hers. I feel the same, she whispered. If you decided to stay in Cimarron, he continued, his blue eyes intense, I would have a reason to come back when I could. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. He was offering her. What exactly? Not a promise, perhaps, but a possibility. A beginning. Would you want that? She asked, needing to hear him say it plainly. More than anything, he replied without hesitation. I've spent years drifting, Josephine, but from the moment I carried you from that train wreck, something changed. I know it sounds strange, we've barely known each other 2 days, but I feel as if I've been looking for you without knowing it. His words echoed her own feelings so precisely that tears sprang to her eyes. It's not strange at all, she said. Or if it is, then we're both equally strange. Relief washed over his face. He squeezed her hand gently. So you'll consider staying? In Cimarron? I'll do more than consider it, she decided in that moment. I'll speak to Mayor Thompson tomorrow morning about the teaching position. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. And I'll speak to my superiors about transferring to this region permanently. They owe me that much after all these years. You think they'll agree? I can be very persuasive when motivated, he replied, a twinkle in his eye. And I've never been more motivated in my life. As they walked back to the boarding house under a vast canopy of stars, Kieran's good arm around her waist to support her, Josephine felt a sense of rightness, of coming home not to a place, but to a person. At her door, they paused, reluctant to part even for the night. I wish you weren't leaving tomorrow, she said softly. It won't be for long, he promised. 2 weeks, 3 at the most, just long enough to complete this assignment and arrange my transfer. I'll hold you to that, Kieran Evans. He smiled, then grew serious. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief but tender, full of promise and possibility. Good night, Josephine, he whispered as he drew back. Dream of me. I will, she promised, knowing it was true. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Josephine had already decided she would not be on the Santa Fe stage with Kieran. Instead, she met with Mayor Thompson, who was overjoyed to hire a qualified teacher for the town school. She sent another telegram to the Santa Fe School Board, explaining her decision and apologizing for any inconvenience. "Are you sure about this?" Kieran asked as they stood outside the stagecoach office, the driver already calling for passengers to board. "Santa Fe is a bigger city with more opportunities." "I'm sure," she replied firmly. "Cimarron feels right to me, and," she smiled up at him, "it has other attractions that Santa Fe can't offer." His answering smile was brilliant. He pulled her close with his good arm, not caring who might be watching. "3 weeks," he promised. "I'll be back before you know it." "I'll be waiting," she said. "Go carefully, Kieran. No more bullets, please." "Yes, madam," he replied with mock seriousness. "Teacher's orders." Their parting kiss was longer than the one the night before, filled with the promise of return and reunion. When the stage pulled away, Josephine watched until it disappeared from sight, her heart full not with sadness but with anticipation. The weeks passed quickly as Josephine settled into Cimarron and prepared for the fall school term. The town welcomed her warmly, and she found herself making friends among the merchants, ranchers' wives, and other professionals. Mrs. Powell became like a mother to her, offering advice and companionship. Her ankle healed well, and by the time the school term began in early September, she was able to walk without the aid of a stick. The schoolhouse was small but well built, with large windows that let in plenty of light. 28 students enrolled that first term, ranging in age from 6 to 16. They were a diverse group, the children of ranchers, shopkeepers, miners, and railroad workers, but all eager to learn. Josephine threw herself into teaching with renewed enthusiasm. Here in Cimarron, she felt appreciated and needed in a way she never had in Boston. The parents respected her knowledge and expertise, and the town council supported her requests for books and supplies. But always, in the back of her mind, was the countdown to Kieran's return. They exchanged telegrams when possible, brief messages that nevertheless sustained her through the separation. Assignment proceeding well. "Miss you daily, K.E., school term begun. 28 pupils, counting days, J.J." 3 weeks stretched to 4 as his assignment in Santa Fe proved more complicated than expected. The telegraph operator began to recognize Josephine on sight, greeting her with a knowing smile whenever she came to send or receive a message. Finally, in early October, a telegram arrived that made her heart soar. "Transfer approved. Returning Thursday's stage. Will call upon you immediately. K.E." Thursday seemed an eternity away, though it was only 2 days. Josephine found it hard to concentrate on her lessons, her mind constantly straying to thoughts of Kieran and their reunion. When Thursday finally arrived, she dismissed her students early, ignoring their curious glances at her unusually flustered state. She hurried back to the boarding house to change into her best dress, a new one she had commissioned from the town seamstress with her first month's salary. The stage was due at 4 o'clock. By 3:30, Josephine couldn't bear to wait in her room any longer. She walked to the stage office, trying not to appear too eager as she browsed the window of the adjacent general store. 4 o'clock came and went with no sign of the stage. By 4:30, Josephine was genuinely concerned. Stagecoaches ran late frequently enough, delayed by weather or mechanical problems, but each passing minute heightened her anxiety. "Don't you worry, Miss Jensen," the stage agent assured her. "These mountain roads can be tricky. Could be a wheel needed repair, or they had to rest the horses longer at the last station. They'll be along." At 5 o'clock, Josephine heard the distant rumble of wheels and the crack of a whip as the driver urged the horses up the final stretch into town. She stepped out onto the boardwalk, her heart pounding in her chest. The stage rolled into town in a cloud of dust, the tired horses slowing to a walk as they approached the station. As it came to a stop, the door opened, and Kieran emerged, his tall figure unmistakable even before she could see his face clearly. He spotted her immediately, standing there in her new blue dress, and a smile broke across his face like sunshine. In 3 long strides he reached her, sweeping her into his arms and lifting her off her feet in an embrace that left her breathless. "You're here," she laughed as he set her down, aware of the curious stares from passers-by, but not caring in the least. "I'm here," he confirmed, his eyes drinking in the sight of her, "and I'm not leaving again, not without you at any rate." "Your arm has healed," she noted, realizing he had lifted her with both arms. "Good as new," he assured her. "Unlike my heart, which I fear is permanently altered." "For the better, I hope. Infinitely better," he said softly. As fall turned to winter, Kieran and Josephine's courtship became the talk of Cimarron. His new position with the Railroad Security Division kept him based in the town, with occasional trips to nearby settlements to investigate incidents or escort important shipments. Each time he left, no matter how briefly, their reunion was joyful. Kieran became a familiar figure at the schoolhouse, often stopping by at the end of the day to walk Josephine home. The children quickly grew attached to the tall, soft-spoken man who sometimes told them exciting tales of outlaws and train robberies. "Mr. Evans, is it true you shot 20 men all by yourself?" asked 10-year-old Billy Thornton one afternoon as they all walked toward town. "Absolutely not," Kieran replied seriously. "Violence should always be the last resort, Billy, and nothing to boast about afterward." Josephine's heart warmed at his response. For all his skill with firearms and tracking, Kieran was at his core a gentle man who used his abilities to protect others, not to seek glory or inflict harm. In December, with snow dusting the mountains around Cimarron, Kieran took Josephine on a sleigh ride through the pine forests north of town. The day was clear and cold, the snow crunching beneath the runners of the sleigh as the horses trotted along the trail. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, taking in the pristine white landscape and the mountains rising in the distance. "Not as beautiful as you," Kieran replied, his arm tight around her shoulders beneath the thick buffalo robe that covered them. She laughed. "That's terribly unoriginal, Mr. Evans." "Perhaps," he conceded with a smile, "but true nonetheless." They stopped at a clearing overlooking a frozen creek, the sun casting long shadows across the snow. Kieran helped Josephine from the sleigh and led her to a fallen log that had been swept clear of snow. "I have something to ask you," he said, his expression suddenly serious. Josephine's heart skipped a beat. "Yes." He took her gloved hands in his. "Josephine Jensen, these past months have been the happiest of my life. For years, I've drifted from place to place, doing my job but never feeling like I belonged anywhere. Until now. Until you." Tears pricked at her eyes as he continued. "I know this isn't Boston, with its fine houses and cultured society. I can't offer you the kind of life you might have had back east, but I can promise to love you, protect you, and build a life with you here in Cimarron if you'll have me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond that caught the winter sunlight. "Will you marry me, Josephine?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Kieran. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger over her glove, then pulled her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss was warm despite the cold air around them, filled with love and promise and the certainty of a shared future. "When?" he asked when they finally parted, both breathless and smiling. "Spring," she decided, "when the wildflowers bloom in the valley." "Spring it is," he agreed. "Though it seems a long time to wait. We have the rest of our lives, Kieran Evans," she reminded him, touching his cheek gently. "A few months is nothing in comparison. Their engagement was celebrated throughout Cimarron. Mrs. Powell insisted on hosting a party at the boarding house, where Kieran had also taken a room after returning from Santa Fe. The entire town seemed to turn out to wish them well, bringing gifts and advice for the young couple. Winter passed in a flurry of preparations and anticipation. Josephine continued teaching, now with the knowledge that next fall she would return to the schoolhouse as Mrs. Evans. Kieran's duties kept him busy as well, though he always managed to be in town for at least 4 days each week. In early April, with the snow melting in the valleys though still capping the distant peaks, they were married in Cimarron's small church. Josephine wore a gown of ivory silk ordered specially from Denver. Kieran, unrecognizable in a new black suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such joy and wonder that it brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers in attendance. Pete served as best man, having returned from his latest assignment just in time for the ceremony. Mrs. Powell, who had become like family to Josephine, sat in the front pew, beaming with pride and dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the pastor declared. "You may kiss your bride." Kieran needed no further invitation. The kiss was brief but tender, sealing their vows before the assembled witnesses. As they turned to face the congregation, now husband and wife, Josephine felt a sense of completion, of having found her true home at last. The reception was held at the town hall, decorated with early spring flowers and ribbons for the occasion. There was food and dancing and more good wishes than the couple could possibly acknowledge individually. As the celebration continued into the evening, Kieran drew Josephine away from the crowd for a moment of privacy. "Mrs. Evans," he said, testing the name with evident satisfaction, "I have a surprise for you." "Another one. The ring and the wedding weren't enough," she teased. "This is different." He took her hand, leading her to the hall's front window. Pointing down the street, he indicated a neat white house with a picket fence and a small front porch. "Our home," Josephine gasped. "You bought a house?" "When? How? I've been saving for years," he explained. "Never had anything worth spending it on until now. I purchased it last month and have been working on it in secret whenever you were busy with the school. Pete helped, and so did half the men in town." "Oh, Kieran," she whispered, overcome with emotion. "It's perfect." "Would you like to see it now?" he asked, a hopeful note in his voice. She glanced back at the reception, still in full swing. "But our guests will understand completely," he assured her. "Besides, they're having too much fun to notice we've slipped away." Hand in hand, they walked down Cimarron's main street to their new home. The house was modest but well built, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a parlor with large windows that caught the evening light. "This room will be perfect for grading papers," Josephine noted as they toured the house. "And is that a bookshelf built into the wall?" "I remembered how many books you brought from Boston," Kieran said. "I thought you might need a place to keep them." Every detail showed his thoughtfulness and understanding of her needs and preferences. As they climbed the stairs to the bedrooms, Josephine's heart swelled with love for this man who had quite literally carried her to safety and into a new life. The master bedroom faced east, its windows positioned to catch the morning sun. A large bed with a handmade quilt dominated the space, flanked by matching bedside tables with oil lamps. "Mrs. Powell made the quilt," Kieran explained. "Said every new couple needs one made with good wishes." Josephine ran her hand over the intricate pattern. "It's beautiful. Everything is beautiful, Kieran. I can't believe you did all this." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. "Believe it, Mrs. Evans, this is our home now. Our life together starts here." She turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. This kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more intimate, with no audience to consider and no reason for restraint. "I love you, Kieran Evans," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you, Josephine Evans," he replied. "More than I ever thought possible." As moonlight spilled through the bedroom windows, they began their life together as husband and wife, their future stretching before them like the vast New Mexico sky, full of promise and endless possibility. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Evans household. Kieran continued his work with the railroad, though he arranged his duties to keep him close to Cimarron as much as possible. Josephine taught at the town school, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. In the spring following their wedding, Josephine discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought Kieran to his knees beside her chair, his head resting in her lap as tears of joy dampened her skirt. "A baby," he whispered in wonder. "Our baby." Their son, William James Evans, was born on a crisp December morning in 1876, with snow falling gently outside the bedroom window. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from his first lusty cry, he had both parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. "He's perfect," Kieran declared, holding his son with a tenderness that made Josephine's heart swell with love. "Absolutely perfect." Life settled into a rhythm of work, family, and community. Cimarron continued to grow, attracting new businesses and families. The railroad expanded, bringing increased prosperity to the region. Kieran's reputation as a fair but formidable lawman grew, and he was eventually offered the position of regional security chief, allowing him to remain based in Cimarron permanently. Josephine's school flourished under her leadership. When a larger building became necessary to accommodate the growing number of students, she successfully lobbied the town council for funding. The new schoolhouse, completed in 1879, featured separate classrooms for different age groups and a small library, Josephine's particular pride. Their family grew again in 1880 with the arrival of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose. Will, now 4, appointed himself his sister's protector and guide, a role he took very seriously. "She's so small, Pa," he said with concern as he peered into the cradle where Elizabeth slept. "How will she learn to ride a horse or shoot a gun?" "She'll grow," Kieran assured him with a smile. "And she'll learn those things when she's ready, just like you did." "I'll teach her," Will decided, "when she's bigger." Through the changing seasons of their lives, the bond between Kieran and Josephine remained unbreakable. The passion of their early days together matured into a deep, abiding love built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. They never forgot how they had found each other in the midst of danger and violence, when a train derailed in outlaw territory, and a cowboy fought them off and carried her to safety. That moment of crisis had forged a connection that grew stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Josephine with a journey back east to visit Boston. It was her first return since leaving for the West, and she found the city both familiar and strange, like a place remembered from a dream. "You ever regret it?" Kieran asked as they stood on the common, watching well-dressed couples stroll along the paths. "Giving up all this for Cimarron and me?" Josephine took his hand, still strong and sure after all their years together. "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "Not for a single moment." The truth of her words was evident in her eyes. The lonely, uncertain young woman who had boarded a train bound for Santa Fe all those years ago could never have imagined the life awaiting her, a life richer and more fulfilling than any she might have found in Boston's drawing rooms. Their visit concluded, they returned to Cimarron, to their children and the home they had built together. As the train, safely this time, carried them west, Josephine rested her head on Kieran's shoulder, content in the knowledge that whatever the future might hold, they would face it together, the school teacher and the cowboy who had rescued her in more ways than one. In the autumn of 1895, with their children grown while studying law in Denver and Elizabeth, attending a women's college in Colorado Springs, Kieran and Josephine stood on the front porch of their home, watching as golden leaves drifted down from the cottonwood trees lining their street. 20 years, Josephine mused, leaning against her husband's sturdy frame. Sometimes it seems like only yesterday that train derailed and you carried me to safety. Kieran's arm tightened around her waist. Best thing that ever happened to me, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I wouldn't have wished the experience on you at the time. I wouldn't change a moment of it, she assured him. Not one single moment. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they remained on the porch, two figures silhouetted against the fading light, still very much in love, still each other's safe harbor in a world that had changed dramatically around them but had never diminished the bond they shared. And in Cimarron, the story was still told of the brave railroad man who had carried a beautiful teacher from a derailed train, fighting off outlaws to bring her to safety, and in doing so, had found his way home at last.